This is a shir on the Sichas Chelek Tazayin, the Sicha of Pikudei, the third Sicha. I want to say thank you very much to the dear listeners to the shir, because I learned the Sicha once, and it seemed quite esoteric. I learned it a second time, and if I wouldn't need to give a shir on it, I probably would have not made the effort to learn it again, and to look up at some of the background information in the footnotes, which is critical. The Rabbi quotes various other places in the Sichas, and therefore, hopefully, with the help of Hashem, I'm going to. I was gifted to see it's a beautiful Sicha. You need a little bit of background information, and hopefully, I hope I'll be able to transmit it in a way that you too will understand at least, part. What do we see of the Rebbe's teachings? We get a glimpse. Hopefully, I be able to, Mitzvah Hashem, be able to transmit some of that. But having said that, not scaring you off. It's a beautiful Sicha, and it's epically, every Sicha is beautiful, but it's extremely meaningful, especially because the way it relates to our mundane lives. Okay, let's jump into it. I hope you'll forgive me for that introduction. It's just that I truly grappled with it, so I want to. Anyway, Nochdem, Pikudei Gimel. After the Torah tells us in detail about the putting up of the Mishkan, and then it speaks about the fact that the Shechina, Hashem's holy presence, rested in the Mishkan. The Torah finishes off and says that the cloud covered the tent of meeting, the Oyel Moed, the Mishkan. So the Mishkan was covered by cloud, and the glory of Hashem filled the Mishkan. And the resting of the Shechina was to the extent it says that Moshe couldn't come to the Oyel Moed, to the Mishkan, to the tent of meeting, because the cloud was residing on it, was resting on it, and the glory of Hashem was filling the Mishkan, and Moshe couldn't come in. And then the Torah says, when the cloud went up from the Mishkan, then the Bnei Yisrael traveled in all their journeys, and if the cloud wouldn't go up, they didn't go until the day that the cloud went up. And that's the way the pasuk finishes. That's the way the whole parsha finishes with the next pasuk. So this is the second to last pasuk. The last pasuk of the whole book of Vayikra. For the cloud of Hashem was on the Mishkan day and night, by day, and the fire was there by night, before the eyes of all the house of Israel, for all of their journeying. When the cloud was there, they stopped. Then when it went up, they traveled. Anyway, so this is the way that the book of Shema finishes. So we have to understand, these two psukim that we quoted, second to last and third to last, it says that it's a technical detail about how the Bnei Yisrael traveled. That so long as the cloud was there, they stayed put. And when the cloud went up, they traveled. So why doesn't it say that where it talks about the traveling of the Jewish people in the desert? And by the way, it does retell it, and with a lengthy retelling in the portion of Baal Yisrael, the next book, Book of Devarim, Book of Bamidbar. And that's where it belongs, seemingly, because that's where we're talking in depth about the Seder, the order of how they traveled. And then it gives that detail that they traveled when the cloud went up. When the cloud didn't go up, they stayed put. Well, what is it being put into this parsha, the end of the Book of Shema, where here we've just finished many parshas that describe the instruction of the Mishkan, the building of the Mishkan, the erecting by Moshe Rabbeinu of the Mishkan, the fact that the Shechina rested on the Mishkan, and now it tells us a detail about traveling. What's it relevant here? So the Seforno explains that the fact that the cloud wouldn't go up until they traveled, this tells us how intimately and to what extent the Shechina was resting in the Mishkan. It was always there, unless they traveled. In other words, saying that only when they traveled did the Shechina depart is telling you that there's a default. The default is the Shechina is always to be found on the Mishkan, unless there's no choice. May I use? Sorry, I'm going to do this. And maybe in many years nobody will even know what this mashal is. We know the mashal of what you would call it, of Corona and wearing masks, right? So how do they tell you about the importance of wearing a mask on a plane or whatever? Only for eating can you take it off, and then only for bites. Between bites, put it back on. It always has to be on. So there's one way of saying something; it always has to be there. And there's another way of saying you can't take it off unless you have to put something in your mouth. That's stronger, right? So this Funu is saying that the pasuk here is saying that only for traveling, then the Anan had to leave. It had to move and go in front of them. Only otherwise, it was always there. The Shekhinah was always in the Mishkan. But this explanation is not so smooth, not so glatt. Glatt means smooth, because from the expression of the pasuk, it's evident that he is coming to tell you about how they traveled, not just telling you about the quality of the connection of, the extent that the Shekhinah was connected to the Mishkan. How do you see this? The Medrash, first of all, says, this is the story of their journeys. He's inserted 2 paragraphs, like 2 psukim, talking about how they journeyed. So that's not understandable, Evazeh. Like, what connection does the telling us about how they traveled got to do over here? It belongs where it indeed is told at great length in the portion of Baleza when it does speak about the travelings. Here we're talking about the Mishkan and the fact that the Shekhinah is in the Mishkan. Why talk about the cloud going up and traveling? The kasha is even stronger. Chazal tell us that the continuation between the end of the book of Shmos and the beginning of the book of Vayikra works like this. Vayikra al Moshe means Hashem called out to Moshe. Why does the book Vayikra start that way? Because we finish off Shmos saying that Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't come into the cloud, into the Oil Moed. Why? Because the cloud was on it. In other words, there was such a big level of Shekhinah there, Moshe couldn't go in. So there had to be that Hashem called out to Moshe. Hashem gave him an invitation, called out, that enabled him to be able to come into the Oil Moed. So there's a direct continuum here. So in other words, the continuation, the flow of the psukim here from the end of Shmos, the beginning of Vayikra, is Moshe couldn't come in, and then Hashem called to Moshe, and he was able to go in. Why does the Torah interrupt with a side thing, what seems to be a side thing, about how they traveled? That when the cloud was there, they stayed put. When the cloud went up, they moved. Base. All things of Torah are exact. Since the Medrash says that Vayikra al Moshe is, although the beginning of a new sefer, but it's a continuation of the previous parsha, that Moshe couldn't go into the El Moed. So we understand that there must be a connection, not just with those in the last psukim of the previous parsha, the first pasuk of the next parsha, but in the entire content of both parshas. These psukim, these individual psukim, are part of an entire parsha. Both of the parshas should have a connection as well. In other words, Sefer Vayikra, the whole Inyan of Sefer Vayikra is a book of Karbonis, and it comes as an extension of. It's actually called Teiras Kohanim, right? It's a book of Karbonis, because about what the Kohanim have to do with the Karbonis, sacrifices. And that comes as a continuation, not just to the story of how the Mishkan was erected, which is the place we have to bring the Karbonis, but also to the details in the way that the Shekhinah rested in the Mishkan, which is described in the Parsha. In other words, the Karbonis in the book of Vayikra has some connection to the description of the process or the way, the quality of how the Shekhinah was connected to the Mishkan, as talked about in the end of our Parsha Pikudei. B'Yeshleima, we could say, says the Rebbe, that this is also the reason why, after it says Moshe couldn't come in because the cloud was on there, the pasuk takes an interruption and says something that seems unrelated, how the Bnei Yisrael traveled, which has to do with the fact that the cloud went up from the Mishkan, which is Siluk, the departure of the Shekhinah from the Mishkan, cloud going up. Why does it interrupt with that? Because it's not an interruption. The content, when we talk about Karbonis, which is going to be the next book, is connected even more than with the Shekhinah residing on the Mishkan. It has a special connection with the journeying of the Yidden, and that which required a departure of the Shekhinah. And this is going to be exciting. There's something that's that's alluded to. There's some level which departing of the Shekhinah, the going up of the cloud, somehow relates even more intensely to the Karbonis, which is going to be the next parsha. And that's why it's there. What the Rabbi says, see later in Seif, in paragraph 8. Now we're going to go into paragraph 3. So the Rebbe is first going to explain a whole introduction, and then wait till the end of the Sikha. The Rebbe is going to explain how this ties into the question we asked. So let's go on a journey now. Let's first understand Bichlal, the Book of Shmos, Gimel. The Book of Shmos, the end and beginning, how do they relate? We know that there's a rule that the end and the beginning have a connection. So what's the connection here? Let's see, the Ha'ara 10, the Rebbe quotes Sefer Yetzirah, a book of Kabbalah, primary book of Kabbalah. So there's this concept. We say it in Tikkun Leil Shvus? No, I don't think so. But we do say from Sefer Yetzirah in Tikkun Leil Shvus because it's a, as I said, it's a primary sefer from and therefore comes in after we say the Mishnah, we say Zohar, we say Sefer Yetzirah also. That was just a parenthetic insertion. So, what does it say? That there's a connection between the beginning and the end. So, what's the connection between the beginning of the Book of Shmos and the end of the Book of Shmos? Well, we find there's a connection with counting. Book of Shmos starts with, these are the names. Shmos means names. These are the names of the Bnei Yisrael who went down to Egypt, and it starts counting them. And Rashi says, even though they were counted already in the end of the Book of Bereshis, when they come down to Egypt, Hashem counts them again because of the belovedness to them. They're like stars where Hashem treats each one individualistically. You love something, you count it and give each one individuality. And then the end of the Book of Shema is Pikudei. Pikudei means these are the counting, this is the account. This is the accounting of the Mishkan, the way it was built. And we start going through all the details of what was donated and how it was used. So, on the one hand, the book starts with numbers, ends with numbers. On the other hand, the content of the Book of Shmos is redemption, going out of Egypt. So how does redemption connect with numbers? I mean, we see that numbers is a point that connects the beginning of the book and the end of the book, so that's got to be something central to the Book of Shmos. On the other hand, we know the Book of Shmos is Exodus, it's Geula, it talks about the redemption of Eden. These seem to be two opposite things. When you count something, it's a sign that there's some limitation. You know, you have the exact count. You have this, and this amount. And counting it emphasizes that. When you talk about redemption, true redemption, that means going out of all kinds of restraints. Can't even be counted. The Rebbe says in Ha'ara 16, to point out from Torah that going out of Egypt is, when we talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim, it's not just going out of the actual borders of Egypt. It's going out of all kinds of meitzadim, all kinds of boundaries of all Seder Ishtalshlus. So it can't be counted. So it seems to be at odds with each other. Numbers, which seems to be the content on the one hand of the book, and Geula, which seems to be another, going out of all boundaries. Going out of all boundaries means going out of numbers also. Says the Rebbe, we find this paradox also in the beginning of the book itself. The name of the book is what? Shmos. And the name of the parsha is Shmos. That tells us there's a certain limited number of Bnei Yisrael. And it lists them who came to Egypt. Then right afterwards it says that the Bnei Yisrael, Poru vayishritzu vayirbu vayatzu b'me'od me'od. They swarmed. They had kids, like swarms of kids, and they became powerful, and they became many, me'od me'od, much. They grew amazingly. So that's speaking not about a limited number. That's speaking about a totally extraordinary growth of their descendants. And since that is part of the beginning of Parsha Shmos, so that means that also somehow relates to numbers. But numbers seem to be more limiting, and this seems to be way unlimiting. The end of Parshas Pikudei, we also find a bit of a paradox. It says this is the counting of the Mishkan. Again, when you count, you know exactly what was donated and how it was used, and the way dimensions, how everything was made in the Mishkan. And then at the end of the Parsha of Pikudei, which is called counting, he says, oh, you know what was going on in the Mishkan? It was such an epic revelation of Hashem. Moshe couldn't come in because the cloud of glory was there. The Shekhinah was, in its unlimitedness was there. Hey, So we're talking about the limitation of the counting, and on the other hand, we talk about even Moshe Rabbeinu, who's the highest form, the most choicest, most complete human, can't go in. So that's like unlimited. So there's counting, which is limitation, and unlimited. The beginning of Shmos, we say these are the names of the Yisrael, a very exact number, and then all of a sudden we go into unlimited growth. Dalet. So the general explanation of this is, even though that the purpose is we should reach the beligvul, the unlimitedness, which is Geula, which is redemption, to go out of all forms of limitations. That's ultimately what Geula is. Which is higher than the limitations of world. But the point is, the kavanah, the intention of Hashem is not that we should totally, that limitation, gvul, boundaries should be, blasted away, should be smashed to smithereens, so to speak. No, that there should be a connection between unlimitedness. Says the Rebbe in Ha'aret 20, because, and this is dealt with at length in Likutei Sichos Chelek Gimel, that only through this way do you really come to the full revelation of the power of Atzmos, of the essence of Hashem. Essence of Hashem is called Nimna Hanimnois. There's a term used in Chassidus brings it. I think it starts already from books it does start from earlier sources. Nimna Hanimnois, Psad Yegoin, and so on. Nimna Hanimnois means, so Nimna means something is held back, something is not possible. Let's say, I would say it's Nimna from me, it's held back from me to be able to walk to America. I'm in Thailand. The sea's there, I can't walk on the sea. Hashem, Atzmos of Hashem is Nimna. It's not possible to say about him, Hanimnois, that there's something that's not possible. Understand? You can't. It's impossible to say that there's an impossibility for him. For us, we have impossibilities. He can do the impossible, and it's impossible to say that something is impossible for him to do. Which means, one of the impossible things to do is, it's possible to have beligvul, to have unlimited. But it's possible to have limitation. But you can have limitation where there's not limitation. Either it's not limited or it is limited. Even you understand that conceptually. If it's unlimited, it's not limited. Hashem can't do that. Chas v'shalom, you can't say those words. There's nothing you can say that Hashem can't do. But that's in the highest level. In other words, in the levels where Hashem's emanation comes, the worlds, even Atzilus and so on, it's B'li Gvul, where there is B'li Gvul, where there's unlimitedness. Sorry, it's not, you want me to be limited also here? I'm unlimited right now. Hashem, but the essence of Hashem, the Atzmos, the essence of Hashem, there's nothing that's impossible for him. So it's impossible to say that he can't be limited and unlimited at the same time. He can be limited and unlimited at the same time. He creates that connection. So, but where do you feel, therefore? Where do you get the full power that this is Hashem in his essence? So if you look at unlimitedness, so you see the infiniteness of Hashem, the beligvul, the unlimitedness of Hashem. Okay, we know that he can be unlimited, but when you look at the limitedness, in other words, as the Rebbe is talking there in the Sikha, you're saying you have to daven in the place of the Beis HaMikdash. Hello, if I'm davening to an unlimited Hashem, why do I need that place, a limited place? That's where Hashem's unlimitedness expresses itself in the limitations of that place. So when I need to be held down to that limitation, I don't make the mistake of thinking, Hashem's limited, chas v'shalom. Nobody would even, that kind of mistake can't be made. But it's possible not to, it would be more probable to say, more plausible to say, in unlimitedness, Hashem's limited to unlimitedness. God forbid. So, where do you see the Chiddush? Where do you see that Hashem is unlimited in everything, in his unlimitation, when you say that you have to daven there because that's where Hashem connected himself to, so to speak. The place of the Beis HaMikdash. What? Limitation? Yeah, no, there's unlimitation there also. How can there be unlimitation if he tells me it has to be in that place? Oh, because Hashem is unlimited. It is in his unlimitedness. It's impossible to say. Something is impossible for him. So that's why it dafka in the Gashmias, in the place of Gvul, that's where it is Hashem's greatness, Hashem's essence is expressed. Says the Rabbi here in square brackets, back to the inside of the Sikha, as we find about the counting of the Bnei Yisrael. It says that the count of the Bnei Yisrael was like the sand of the sea, which can't be counted, can't be measured, can't be counted. That's a pasuk that seems to be contradicting itself. It says the count of the Bnei Yisrael will be like the sand of the sea that cannot be measured, it cannot be counted. In other words, the count will be that it's not countable. Similarly about the Mishkan. The resting of Hashem in the Mishkan, which is higher than limitation. Where was it? In the Mishkan, that was countable. The Rebbe doesn't bring this here, but perhaps we can mention it. The Rebbe brings it many places. That the Oren, about the Mishkan, the Oren had to have exact dimensions. But when you measured from one side of the Kodesh HaKadoshim to the other, without taking the Aron, was it? I don't remember the exact dimension. Sorry, it was 10 amas, let's say, across, or 20, whatever it was that amount of amas. And then when you went on both sides of the Aron, from the side of the Aron to the walls, it was the same amount as if you went from wall to wall without the Aron. So it was 5 plus 5, and outside the Aron was 10. You get what I'm saying? The Aron didn't take a place, but that's not the greatest. That's not Gilui of Atzmos, says the Rebbe, because you could have something that doesn't take a place. But the fact is that if you measured the Aron, it did have a measurement, and yet that measurement and the not measurement, Gvul and not Gvul, were together. The Rebbe says the Mishkan, the resting of Hashem was higher than Medid of Agbala, but on the other hand, you needed exact dimensions of the Klei HaMishkan. So the Gvul and Gvul are coming together. Why? Says the Rebbe, because since the Hashem's kavana, since the whole the supernal kavana lienis, the Hashem desires to have a dwelling place in the lower worlds. So there needs to be achieved here two things. There needs to be, on the one hand, a dira, a dwelling place for Hashem. Hashem is totally higher than the world. On the other hand, where does this dira have to take place? In Tachteinim, in the physical world. That there's no lower world in this. It's a world of measure and limitation. So you need to have this fusion of Bli Gvul and Gvul coexisting. These two things are chapter 5. These two concepts: one, that it's a dira, it's a dwelling place for the essence of Hashem. Two, that it's a dwelling place for the essence of Hashem in Tachteinim, in the lower worlds. This, generally speaking, we have this distinction plays out between the neshamas of Yidden, the actors, the main actors in this process of making Hashem Adira, which is Yidden, Jewish people who are endowed with neshamas, Yisrael, Jewish neshamas, and world, because the pnimius, the internal intention of making Hashem Adira is what? As it says, Hashem is going to dwell in the Neshamas Yisrael. That the Bnei Yisrael, Knesset Yisrael, the community of Israel, is a mochen l'shifta, is a base, is a for Hashem's, is a place where Hashem resides. How does that? What does that mean? Since it says that Yisrael and Kodesh B'richu Yidden and the Eibishter are one. So really, Yidden, in their most intrinsic and essential and existential state, are one with Hashem. And they, therefore, are the ultimate dwelling place for the essence of Hashem, because they are one with Hashem. Square brackets here. However, when we talk about Dira B'Tachtenim, we talk about the dwelling place in the lower worlds, the way it expresses itself in world. So, how does it express itself in world? What gets comprehended in the world is that its entire existence is only because of the essence of Hashem. And besides for Hashem, there's no other existence whatsoever. We'll go back to this in a second. However, the dira, the actual dwelling place of Hashem, Where does it? So really, in a sense, it becomes expressed by Yidden. Hashem's full intention and residing is in the Neshama Yisrael, because Yidden are one with Hashem. It just has to be revealed, just has to be uncovered. But they're one with Hashem. The Neshama is one part of Hashem. Where does the Dira, however, where do we see the dwelling place of Hashem becoming accomplished? It's in the lower worlds. When the Yidden work, not when they're Neshamas under the holy throne of Hashem up in heaven, when they come in the lower worlds, in this world, in the lower world. And they make from the physical things a vessel for godliness. Because only then comes out, this expresses the essence and the source of the neshama of a Yid, how they're one with Hashem. Because in order to be able to, in other words, there was a signa. When do we see what achieves, what accomplishes the revelation of the fact that the Yidden are truly a dwelling for Hashem, they're truly one with Hashem, without any limitations, without any barriers? It's when they're able to uncover that the lower worlds are not separate from Hashem. That even the limitation and the measurement and the concealment that's in the lower worlds is not a concealment, it's not a barrier. On the contrary, they're able to make in the lower worlds a place where Hashem's wholeness, where Hashem's presence can be expressed. The fact that they're able to achieve that, the fact that Hashem gives them a mission to make this world a dwelling place for Hashem, the world is Gashmias, the world is materialism, coarse. The fact that they're entrusted with this and they're able to do this and uncover the cause, show that no, the world is a place for Hashem's presence to be revealed by the mitzvahs they're given and so on and so forth, using everything and utilize everything for Hashem's purposes. That shows within them, that uncovers within them their power. How can they do this? Their power is because they're actually a part of Hashem. So, therefore, what's happening here, again, just to sum up, what's happening here is incredible. The world, the Yidden, they're tasked by Hashem to make this world a dwelling place for Hashem. How can they do such a thing? The fact that they can do such a thing is because they too are a part of Hashem. He's born, how do you know he's part of Hashem? Because the fact that he can transform the world into being a dwelling place for Hashem shows his power, that he truly is a part of Hashem. He truly is a dira for Hashem. So one second, so it's getting expressed in the world, right? And that's showing the power that the Yid has to become a dira. He's one with Hashem. Let's see how this plays out in life. Vav. This will understand the beginning of the Book of Shema is about the measure, about the count of the Bnei Yisrael, and the end is about the Klei HaMishkan. Why? Sefer Bereshis is talking about creation. The way it is before the revelation in creation of what its intention is. Just talks about creation. When we come to the Book of Shema, we talk about the giving of the Torah. We know already, it's hinted at in the Rashi and Bereshis, that the world is created for Torah and for Yisrael. But we don't meet the Bnei Yisrael really in the first book of the Torah, and we don't meet the giving of the Torah, definitely not. That happens in the second book. The first book is before the revelation of the intention. It's creation. The Book of Shemais speaks about Yidden, how they're born into being a people. When are the Yidden born into being a people? The book says the birth of the Jews. There's a chapter in Yecheskel that speaks about going out of Egypt as being describing it in the metaphoric language of birth. So the Jewish people are born in the Book of Shemais at going out of Egypt. And Book of Shemais speaks about giving of the Torah. And through Bnei Yisrael and Torah, the intention of creation, which is described at length in the first book of the Torah, becomes revealed. And when we talk about the fact that Yidden carry out the intention of the Bria, which is the Book of Shema speaks about the intention, the ones who are carrying it out and what's being carried out, there's a beginning and end. The beginning and the main and the pnimius of the Kavanah is Bnei Yisrael. That's how it starts off. They're the key actors, they're the key players, and it's about them. It's about them that Hashem makes the world so that their greatness, that their oneness with Hashem should be expressed through what they're doing in the world. Right? So, the book starts off about how they're one with Atzmos. That's why counting the Bnei Yisrael, to show their endearment, to show that they're one with Hashem, so Hashem loves them. And that's why Hashem counts them in Torah. It becomes part of Torah. Hashem's counting them and showing His belovedness to them. What's the end? What's the extrapolation, the end of that process? The Yidden are the Kavanah, and how does that... Safe means, when we have a plan, and then what's the fulfillment of that plan? There's a potential, there's an actualization. What's the actualization of the Yidden fulfilling their kavanah? How do we see the kavanah being fulfilled by the Yidden? When they actually carry out B'Poel, making a dwelling place for Hashem in the world. As we said, the fact that they're able to transform the world, the physical things, into a dwelling place for Hashem, exposes and shows and brings out and extols what their power is, that they're one with. How can they do this? Because they're one with Hashem. So it expresses their... maybe I just use a very loose mushal. How do you know somebody's a strong man? When he starts lifting up weights, and he can lift up very, very, very heavy weights, you see, this is a strong guy. Well, we can make a dira for Hashem in Tachteinim. This shows, hey, the Jews they're one with Hashem. That's why they can do this. Just by the way, go back to the... to our Rebbe says, if the book of Bereshis is just about creation, doesn't yet reveal to you the plan, so why is it part of the Torah? So the Rebbe says, because that itself, in order there should be Dir B'Tachtenim, Ha'ara 33, in order there should be Dir B'Tachtenim, it's through this in itself that first of all the Kavanah the Bria is hidden, and you gotta through Aveda, the Neshama Yisrael, through their Aveda, make the world a Dira for Hashem. In other words, everything comes... Making a Dira for Hashem has to come from a place of concealment. If it's all clear and open and it's simple, everybody knows what you got to do. Everybody wants to do what you got to do. There's Aveda. So first we talk about creation in a way of concealment. We don't know yet the Kavanah. Then the second book speaks about the Kavanah. Then the Rebbe says, so we're talking about the beginning of the intention is Bnei Yisrael. That's the Pnimius. The actualization of that, and in a way the Chitzonius, says the Rebbe in Ha'ara 36. In other words, there's a Pnimius of the Dir B'Tachtenim. That's Neshama Yisrael. That's where the Book of Shema starts off with. Because their Metzias is, so to speak, is Kavayachal Le'atzmos. Then there's the external part of making a Dira, which is in the world. The fact that the world becomes a place for the expression of revelation of Atzmos. However, the Rebbe says here a very subtle thing in the square brackets. Mikol Makim in the Ha'ara 36. Mikol Makim Ein Zeh Harkav Chas Shalom Beis Inyanim. As we said in Ha'ara 31, but this is not its place, this is not a place to give a lengthy thing about this, that the Dir B'Tachtenim is also not something that the Tachtenim, the world, is being used to bring out the greatness of the Jew. So then it's not truly part of the Tachtenim. Don't truly become a Dir for Hashem. And since Dir B'Tachtenim is a plan of Atzmos, it can't be made up of two things. I can't say I understood this fully, but I'm just pointing it out. You want to listen to some of the other wonderful shiurim here on Project Likutei Sichos, or delve into it yourself, look into the Marmar Kemis, the other Sichos that Rebbe quotes here. A lot of this stuff is heavily talked about in other places of Likutei Sichos. There's a beautiful, very deep, and I'm sure you can find more. In the way in Rabbi Kant's shiurim al Vashalom. Anyway, Zayin. Since we talk about that the Sheiresh of Neshamas are the source of the Neshamas of Yidden, how they're one thing with Atzmos. Where do you see the expression of that? What reveals that? Through the fact that they are Aveda, they work in Tachteinim and making Tachteinim into a place for Hashem. Because Tachteinim otherwise are a place of concealment. The fact that they can uncover that and create a dwelling place for Hashem in that place, we see their intrinsic power that the Yidden in Neshama Yisrael one with Hashem. For this we understand, where does this mainly get achieved? More than even building the Mishkan. The Mishkan was officially a place of Gili Elikus, of godly revelation. It's when you're working with a Tachten, with something that's not officially godly at all. With Mitzad Atzma, if you look at it in and of itself, it's not a vessel for it's not a vehicle or vessel for godliness. And even more, not even a time of godly revelation. Because when you had a Mishkan, the rest of the world also was more prone to godly revelation. It's even more expressed in a time when we don't even have a Mishkan. There's no godly revelation, and we're not talking about a holy place. We're talking about out there in the world. That's when this gets expressed. And that's why this is the explanation, that at the end of talking about the building of the Mishkan and the fact that the Shekhinah rested on the Mishkan, Hashem says, and they also had another further deeper level in a sense when the cloud went up. Because the purpose of the Mishkan is to not just be a place where Hashem resides there, but to make the whole Tachteinim, lower worlds, a dwelling place for Hashem. Where does that get expressed? Where does that get achieved? Mainly that the Mishkan should have this effect. The Mishkan gives the koyach that this should also be whenever they journey outwards. As Alter Rebbe explained, the journeying in the desert wasn't, God forbid they were lost. No GPS. They didn't know where they were going. Chas v'shalom. There was on. Everything was mechuven. What was the purpose? They were in a desert, a place of klippa. And this hints on and is allegoric and tells us about the journey later on in Midbar Ha'amim, in the desert of the nations, the Golus times. And that, in the desert, you have Shechinta b'Golus. The Shechinah is in Golus, and especially in the time of Golus, there's no Gili of Shechinah. The Onan went up. The Shechinah departs from being revealed in the world. And at that time, the Eden created a dwelling place for the world. They transformed the concealment and the darkness of the world. That also there should be a shining of Elikus. Now the Rebbe is coming back, is going to answer why do we put in those verses about departure, about traveling, at the end of Shema as an introduction to Vayikra. The Rebbe said at the beginning of Sikha, wait to see if paragraph 8, and I'm going to tell you. Ches. This previous inyan, at the tachlis of the Mishkan, becomes, the intention of the Mishkan becomes achieved mainly through the service outside the Mishkan, because that's more concealment, more tachteinim. We have this in the concept of the Mishkan itself, in the fact that the main avodah of the Mishkan was actually the karbanis. What's the difference between the actual being of the Mishkan and what was done in the Mishkan? So the building of the Mishkan, what was the purpose? It wasn't so much about elevating what the Mishkan was made out of, but it was actually about, there's an elevation and there's a drawing down. It was actually about creating a place down below where Hashem's Shekhinah should come from above. That was the real intention, to draw down the Shekhinah, to allow a place that could express Hashem's holy Shekhinah down below. And that kind of resting is way higher than anything that physical things can be elevated to. What was Karbanis? So the actual presence of the Mishkan was to allow a space for Hashem's presence to pervade. The Karbanis was the exact opposite. It was to take the animal and to uplift, to elevate the animal. And by the animal, this refers to all Gashmias. Taking a physical animal and making a sacrifice to Hashem. Transforming that into Kedusha. I mean, literally, the animal was turned into smoke and went up heavenward, so to speak. But that was showing what was happening in Beruchnius. The physical animal was becoming holiness. It became a mitzvah, became Kedusha. And therefore, even though what happened through the Karbonis, which is the Kedusha that comes through this, is a preparation to come to a higher level. In other words, the offering up the Karbonis was then going to bring down the Shekhinah into the Mishkan, into the Aron. And that's why it says Vayikra. Vayikra, Moshe says, and the Vayikra has a small aleph. The last letter of Vayikra is an aleph, it has a small aleph. What does that show on? Says the Alter Rebbe, it's tzimtzum. It's that Hashem contracted his revelation. Because in the Aved of Karbonis, which is what the Sefer Vayikra is talking about, so the Kedusha that becomes Nimsha, that becomes drawn down, is smaller than the actual Kedusha that's in the residing of Hashem in the Mishkan. Because the whole purpose of Vayikra al Moshe, why is that tzimtzum? Hashem contracted, so to speak, his presence to allow a space for Moshe Rabbeinu to come into the Mishkan. B'meila, nonetheless, dafka through the Aved of Karbonis, you come to a higher. So the Karbonis elevation, in a way, it's drawing down Hashem in the Mishkan. So the elevation of the Karbanis we're saying is less. It's like a tzimtzum. It's a contraction of Kedusha. How much can you elevate? And then what happens is a huge, epic revelation of Hashem here in the Oren, the holiest place. But nonetheless, even though we're talking about the resting of Hashem and the Mishkan as being the highest thing, dafka through this you come to an even higher intention and function of the Mishkan, which is to transform Gashmis, transform the physical things into a vehicle for Elikus. And that's why we understand why calling out to Moshe and the whole book of Karbanis is an extension of the psukim, not only the psukim that Hashem rested in the Mishkan, but when the cloud went up, Hashem departed, so to speak, because that is the same point as Karbanis. In other words, that the Mishkan gives the power to be able to get to its deeper, even, so to speak, deeper intention, to create from the physicality, to transform the physicality into a dwelling place for Hashem. And where's that expressed? It's expressed even more in a place where the presence of Hashem is not so evident, right? Outside the Mishkan, when the traveling is going on. 9. Tes. Even though in the Avodah of Hashem, when they traveled, on the one hand, you could say there's a lack of revelation of Shekhinah. The cloud went up, which means there's no revelation of the Shekhinah. The Mishkan was packed up and they traveled. But dafka through this reveals even more the source of the Yidden, how they're one with Hashem, and that they're able to impact an even greater Dira B'Tachtenim. Or 44, because even though the Karbonis emphasized that as well, but the Karbonis were taking place in the holy place of the Mishkan. Dafka, when you talked about the journeys that were journeying outside the holy space, that's the true expression of these neshamas able to create in the outside space from the Mishkan. When they're traveling, when there's a siluk Shechina, they're able to make a dwelling place for Hashem. That brings out, wow, these neshamas must be one with Hashem, with Atzmas. And that's why Rabbi says Yishlem in R44, that's why the reason we talk about the journeying, it's much in greater length only in the book of Amidwa, which is after Karbonis. Karbonis achieved this thing about elevating Gashmis in a certain space, in a certain level, but it's in the space of the Mishkan. The next level is to go and impact even the desert, even the space of the Golus. So really, this is the Pnimis Dikapirush of when the last two psukim, the third to last and second to last psukim that we said were, why did they come in here at the end of to talk about the resting of the Shekhinah? It says when the cloud went up from the Mishkan, that's when the Bnei Yisrael traveled in all their journeys. Taka, outwardly you saw, see look, departure of the Shekhinah, the cloud went up. With Pnimius, however, through this Aveda you come to someplace higher than the Anana Mishkan. You come to a place that's even higher than the cloud of Shekhinah that was on the Mishkan. And then you're able to get to that higher level and draw that down, you draw that down in the place that you encamp. So really what's happening is when the Shekhinah leaves the Mishkan, it looks like we just lost our high level of Shekhinah presence. But really it's in order to take us to an even higher level where now we're going to impact even the outside. And now when we go and do encamp, now we're bringing that level, this higher level is coming to reside within us. And this is the point. This is the Hirah for each and the Rebbe says in Araf 45, this is similar to what it says in Tanya in the introduction, Chinuch Kot, introduction to Shari Yichud Ve'emunah, that it says you have to go from Madrega to Madrega, and then it says, but you know what, between level and level, there's a falling. Before you get to the higher level, it's a kind of you go backwards in order to jump even higher. And it seems to be that that's the way it has to be. In other words, that's the way it is. This is what we're saying. This Rebbe says, this seems to be what we're saying here, the point we're saying here. That yes, was the highest level of Shekhinah was resting on the Mishkan, and then all of a sudden it departed. Oy vey, that seems to be withdrawal. No, but it was in order to go higher and then to get to your next encampment, but it's not going back to where you were in the first place. It's a higher level now. In between, there's a departure, which seems like it's a problem, but no, it's allowing you to do something even more radical, which shows on a higher level. And what's the point here? That ends, of course, with a practical point. The teaching for us, each and every one of us in our Avodas Hashem, notwithstanding the darkness of the Golus, especially a person knows about himself what his individual situation is. The Golus Prati, the individual exile, which is by him. So a person has to know that through the fact that the Yid is committed to do his mission in Bechol Maseim, in all of the journeys, no matter what journey it is. So long as his journey is connected with the cloud of Hashem, that only if the cloud goes up he travels, and if it doesn't, he doesn't travel. In other words, he knows that Hashem is guiding his steps wherever he goes, in whatever situation he may find himself. He knows that he has a mission from Hashem to make a dwelling place. Memela, even if he's in a place of Golus, and even if he finds himself in a internal state of Golus, he knows, okay, I am exactly where I'm meant to be. Now I got to follow the cloud and do what Hashem wants. So then what happens then is that this departure of the cloud doesn't become a ha'olis, a departure becomes l'malusa, it becomes in the good sense. Ha'olis, you go higher than the cloud. The cloud is already, we said, such a high level, even Moshe Rabbeinu can't go in there. We have a Moshe Rabbeinu in each of every one of us. Even that Moshe Rabbeinu in you can't go to the cloud. It's such a high level of Shekhinah. But then, no, Hashem says, I'm going to give you an opportunity to go even higher than that cloud. And then you have to make sure to bring that level into your next encampment until we reach the level where Yisrael, v'kodesh kol echad, Hashem and the Jewish people are all one. Atzlacha in the journey.